Welcome to the Deep Dive. I'm your host, and I come to these discussions as an experienced Bible teacher, always looking to kind of unpack scripture calmly and clearly.
And I'm here as a thoughtful believer, I guess you could say. Somebody who just wants to ask those honest, sincere questions that, we all have when we read the text.
Exactly. And today we are doing something that I really think is going to challenge the mental image a lot of us carry around.
Yeah.
We are stepping into a time machine, essentially. We're going back 2,000 years to look at this massive, imposing shadow that hangs over the entire New Testament.
It is a shadow that is just impossible to miss once you start looking for it. But so often, we just read right past it. We are talking, of course, about the Roman Empire.
Romans, and
Mhm.
specifically, we are diving into a really thoughtful essay by Brother Woody Brahm. It's titled The Romans, the Ruling Empire in the Time of Jesus and the Early Church.
And I have to say, reading through this source material, it really shifts your perspective.
It does.
Usually when I read the Gospels or the Book of Acts, I focus on the main characters, Jesus, Peter, Paul. And Rome is
Plus
just,
the scenery.
yeah, exactly. It's the background noise. It's the guys
Yeah.
with the spears standing in the back of the painting.
But what Brother Brom's essay really highlights, and this is critical, is that Rome wasn't just scenery. It was an active force. It was the ruling empire, just like the title says.
Right.
It shaped the logistics of how the gospel spread. It shaped the specific conflicts Jesus faced. And it shaped the very legal system that Paul navigated. If you ignore Rome, you miss half the texture of the story.
And the tone of this deep dive, we want to really mirror the source material here.
Yeah.
This isn't just a history lesson for the sake of trivia. Brother Brome writes with a very pastoral, serious, and warm tone.
Very pastoral.
So the goal here is learning, but it's learning for a purpose. We aren't just collecting facts for a test. We are trying to see the world Jesus walked in.
That's right. The premise we are unpacking today is fascinating to me. When you open the New Testament, Rome looks like the ultimate power.
Oh, absolutely.
They have the armies, they have the laws, they have all the glory. But the core tension the essay brings out is that Rome, for all its ironclad strength, was actually just a tool.
A tool? That feels like a strange word to use for the greatest superpower of the ancient world.
It does, doesn't it? But the essay argues they were a tool in the hands of God.
That is the part that really grabbed me. So our mission for this deep dive is basically threefold.
Okay.
First, we want to understand the historical setting.
Yeah.
We need to know who these Caesars and Pilates actually were. Not just names in a book, but real political figures.
Yeah, real people.
Second, we want to sharpen our vision of how God directs history.
Sovereignly directing it. Not just, reacting to it when things go wrong, but actively directing it.
Right. And third, and I think this is the big one, we want to move beyond just the history and find the practical spiritual application for us today.
Because if God could use the Roman Empire, he can probably handle whatever is going on in our world right now.
Precisely. It's about seeing the temporary nature of earthly power compared to the eternal nature of God's plan.
So let's set the stage. Let's get into the history. I want to start with a visual.
Okay.
When you picture the New Testament, Jesus walking by the Sea of Galilee or Paul preaching in a market, what does the background look like in your head?
Well, for most people, I think it's dusty sandals, robes, maybe a donkey.
Right.
It feels very, local, very pastoral, maybe a little isolated.
Exactly. It feels quiet. But we've got this essay in front of us today, and he's essentially arguing that our mental image is missing the biggest character in the room.
The elephant in the room, or rather the eagle, the Roman eagle.
So let's trace this back. The essay starts way back. I mean, way back in time.
It does. It gives us the long view, which is helpful. To understand the Rome of Jesus' day, you have to understand where it came from. Tradition places the founding of Rome in 753 BC.
753 BC, so long before the events of the New Testament.
Centuries before. And it didn't start as an empire. It started as a kingdom, then it transformed into a republic around 509 BC.
Okay.
And that republic era is famous. It thrived on a balance of power. You had consuls, senators, assemblies. It was designed specifically to prevent any one person from having too much control.
Which sounds great on paper. It sounds very modern, actually.
It does sound modern, but as the source notes, ambition and civil strife gradually eroded that stability.
Human nature, basically.
Effectively, yes. You had generals becoming more powerful than the Senate. And that leads us to the critical turning point mentioned in the essay, which is 27 BC.
27 BC. This is the shift from republic to empire.
Correct. This is when Octavian takes the name Augustus. He becomes the first emperor.
Wow.
And this is vital context because by the time we get to the birth of Jesus, this transition has already happened. The Republic is gone. The messy democracy is gone. The empire is born.
And Augustus is the guy in charge.
He is. And under him, Rome is at its absolute height. The essay emphasizes this. Rome encompasses much of Europe, North Africa, the Middle East. It is a massive, sprawling machine of governance and military might.
It's hard to overstate how big this was. I mean, if you were living in that region, Rome wasn't just a government, it was the world.
It was the known world for them. And this brings us to a specific geographical point that matters for our discussion. Rome in Israel.
Right, because obviously the Bible takes place in Israel. How did Rome get there? It feels like a long way from Italy.
Well, the source points to 63 BC. That's when the Roman general Pompey marched into Jerusalem.
Just imagine the sound of that.
Exactly, boots on the pavement. And Pompey didn't just walk in, he marched. He actually entered the Holy of Holies in the temple.
Which was a massive violation of Jewish law.
A total desecration. From that moment on, Israel was under the thumb of Rome. But, and this is a nuance the essay brings, the style of rule changed over time.
Yeah, let's unpack that. Because we hear about King Herod and then we hear about Pontius Pilate. They seem like different kinds of leaders. Why are there two different titles?
They represent two different phases of Roman strategy. Initially, Rome ruled indirectly through what are called client kings. Herod the Great is the prime example here.
Client king. That sounds so corporate.
It is, in a way. Think of Herod like a franchise owner.
A franchise owner. That's an interesting way to look at it.
Yes. Rome is the corporate headquarters. They own the brand, they set the big policies, and they take a cut of the profits.
Right.
But they don't want to manage the day-to-day operations of every single store, especially in a difficult neighborhood like Judea.
Judea was the difficult neighborhood.
Oh, absolutely. The Jewish people had a different religion, different customs. They were prone to rebellion. Rome didn't want to send a Roman general to deal with every little local dispute.
That makes sense.
So they find a local, someone who knows the language, knows the customs, but who is completely dependent on them for his power.
And that was Herod.
That was Herod. He was the franchisee. He sat on a throne. He built palaces, but he owed that throne entirely to Roman favor. He was a middleman.
He was keeping the peace for the boss in Rome.
Exactly. And that explains why Herod was so incredibly paranoid. He was balancing on a knife's edge. He had to please Caesar to keep his job, but he had to keep the Jewish people from rioting so Caesar wouldn't get mad.
That sounds exhausting.
It was deadly. But after Herod died, his kingdom was divided among his sons. And eventually, they were so incompetent that Rome said, enough. We are taking over the franchise.
Corporate is stepping in.
Exactly. Judea itself, the southern part, where Jerusalem became a Roman province under direct rule. That's where you get procurators or governors like Pontius Pilate.
So instead of a local king who answers to Rome, you have a Roman official actually running the show. A middle manager sent from Italy to fix the failing store.
That is a perfect analogy. And the essay notes that this shift to direct rule sharpened the tensions. It caused immense friction.
Why is that? I mean, Herod was bad, Pilate was bad. What's the difference to the average person on the street?
Well, imagine the psychological impact. A client king is one thing. At least he speaks your language, vaguely understands your traditions.
Yeah.
But a Roman governor, that is a daily, visible reminder that you are a conquered people.
That's right in your face.
It is. You see Roman soldiers on the street corners. You see Roman standards. You pay taxes directly to a Roman official. The Jewish people were longing for deliverance. They were looking for the Messiah.
And the heavier the Roman hand felt, the more intense that longing became.
Exactly. The pressure cooker was heating up.
Now, before we get to the biblical narrative, let's talk about the culture of the empire itself. The essay uses two words to describe it: power and pragmatism.
Yes. Those are the defining traits.
When we think of Roman power, we usually think of the legions, right?
Legions were fearsome. They were known for discipline and absolute brutality. The source makes it clear that Rome didn't ask nicely. They conquered. They were the Iron Kingdom, which we will get to later.
But alongside that brutality was this incredible pragmatism.
Extremely pragmatic. Look at the infrastructure.
The roads and aqueducts.
Engineering genius. The essay notes that Rome brought hardship and oppression, yes, but it also brought unexpected order. They built 50,000 miles of paved roads. They cleared the sea of pirates.
That's a tricky balance to strike, oppression and order.
It is the paradox of empire. They provided stability, but their laws often heavily favored the elite. And then you have the religious aspect. Rome was highly pluralistic,
Meaning they had a lot of gods.
a huge pantheon. Jupiter, Mars, Venus, many borrowed from the Greeks. They were generally tolerant of other religions, provided you didn't cause trouble.
Right, keep the peace.
But then a new unifying force emerged: emperor worship.
Worshipping the Caesar.
It started gradually, but eventually became a test of loyalty, burning incense to the genius of the emperor. It demanded a loyalty that placed Christians and Jews in direct conflict with Rome.
Because if the state demands you worship the leader as God and your faith says there is only one God, you have a problem.
A massive problem. It's political treason mixed with religious heresy in their eyes.
And the essay points out something profound here. It says, Rome projected glory and dominion, marble statues, golden eagles, but beneath the surface, it carried seeds of decay.
What does that look like in practice?
Moral corruption, political intrigue, spiritual emptiness. The essay argues that while the outside looks shiny and invincible, the core was rotting. It was hollow.
Wow.
And that is the world into which Jesus was born, a world of massive power, but also massive emptiness.
Okay, so let's move into the next major section of the essay, the biblical narrative. We've set the stage. We have this massive, slightly rotting, but incredibly powerful empire. And then we zoom in on a tiny town called Bethlehem.
And here is where we see the interplay between Rome's agenda and God's agenda. The essay highlights the birth of Christ.
It starts with a decree. A decree went out from Caesar Augustus.
We hear that every Christmas. It's part of the pageant. But think about the mechanics of it. Why does Augustus want a census?
He's not doing it to fulfill biblical prophecy.
No, he's doing it for taxes, for military recruitment. It is a bureaucratic, pragmatic Roman move. He wants to count his subjects so he can use them. He is sitting in a palace in Rome, moving pieces on a map.
Just thinking, I need more money, count the people in Judea.
Exactly. But God uses that bureaucratic decree to move a couple, Mary and Joseph, from Nazareth to Bethlehem.
Which fulfills the prophecy.
The prophecy of Micah, that the Messiah would be born in David's city. Augustus thinks he's organizing his empire. God is organizing the arrival of his son.
That is just, it gives you chills. Augustus has absolutely no idea he's a pawn in this. He thinks he's the king on the chessboard, but he's just a pawn.
None at all. And then there is the darker side. The essay mentions the massacre of the infants.
Under Herod.
Under Herod's authority, which, remember, was backed by Rome. He was the franchise owner protecting his territory. This fulfills Jeremiah's prophecy regarding sorrow in Ramah.
We need to pause here for a second because usually we skip over this part. It's too sad. But the essay makes a point to include it in this narrative.
It does. As a teacher, I think it reminds us that this wasn't a fairy tale. Real power was threatened and real people suffered.
Yeah.
These were real families losing their children because a puppet king was paranoid about a rival. It shows the true cost of earthly power. It crushes the innocent to protect itself.
It's incredibly tragic, but it really shows the stakes.
Now, fast forward to Jesus' ministry. The essay points out a few interactions where Jesus deals directly with Roman authority. One that stands out to me, and I want to dig into this, is the centurion at Capernaum.
This is a pivotal moment. Let's stop on the centurion for a minute because I think we've heard this story so many times in Sunday school, we miss how weird it actually is.
It's incredibly weird. Break down the power dynamic for us. Who is this guy?
Well, a centurion isn't just a grunt soldier. He's an officer. He commands 100 men. He is the face of the occupation in Capernaum.
Right.
He represents the iron boot of Rome. In terms of social hierarchy, he is the oppressor, and Jesus is a peasant from conquered territory.
So legally, this guy could probably just order Jesus to come to his house.
Absolutely. He could demand it. He could arrest him. He could drag him there. You, Jew, come heal my servant. That's how a Roman normally speaks to a subject.
But that's not what happens here.
No. The essay highlights the absolute shock of his approach. He doesn't pull rank. He comes with deep humility. Lord, I am not worthy to have you come under my roof.
Think about that. A Roman officer saying, I am not worthy to a Jewish rabbi.
It turns the entire social pyramid of the empire upside down. And do you remember Jesus' reaction?
He marveled.
He marveled. The Greek word there implies being physically stopped in your tracks. He had not found such great faith, even in Israel.
That is huge.
It is, and the essay interprets this beautifully. Jesus declares that many from east and west would sit in the kingdom. It's a foreshadowing. The gospel isn't just for the conquered, it's going to reach the conquerors too.
And then, inevitably, we have to talk about money. The taxation question.
The render to Caesar moment. It's an absolute masterclass. They try to trap Jesus. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar?
It's a perfect trap. If he says yes, the people hate him because they hate the tax. If he says no, the Romans arrest him for treason.
Right. And he asks for a coin, a Roman coin.
Visualize that coin for a second.
It would have the image of Tiberius Caesar stamped right on it, and likely an inscription declaring him to be the son of the divine Augustus.
So it's literally a blasphemous coin.
To a faithful Jew, yes, it's an idol. The essay notes that this coin was a daily reminder of the occupation. You couldn't buy bread without seeing Caesar's face.
Wow.
You couldn't participate in the economy without acknowledging Rome.
And Jesus says, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's.
He creates a distinction there. He acknowledges Roman authority in its limited sphere, the coin, the economy, the political structure. But he reserves ultimate authority for God.
Right.
He's saying Caesar can have his metal discs, but God owns your life.
Which leads us to the ultimate clash of authorities, the crucifixion.
This is the climax of the narrative, and the essay is very specific here. The crucifixion was a Roman act.
We often focus on the Jewish leaders handing him over, but legally.
Legally, the Jewish council didn't have the authority to execute capital punishment.
Mm-hmm.
They had to go to the governor. They needed Rome. They needed Pilate.
And Pilate, poor Pilate. I mean, not poor Pilate. He made his choice, but he found no fault in Jesus.
Who didn't? He knew Jesus was completely innocent of breaking any Roman law, but he yielded to pressure. That's the political pragmatism again.
The corporate fixer.
Exactly. His job is to keep the peace. If executing one innocent peasant keeps the city from rioting, that's a trade he's willing to make.
And the brutality that followed, that was Roman too.
Entirely. The mocking, the crown of thorns, the nailing to the cross, the casting lots for his garments. These were soldiers doing what soldiers do to criminals. It was the machinery of the empire crushing someone who got in the way.
But then this is one of my favorite points in the essay there is this confession.
The irony is stunning. Who is the one person at the foot of the cross who gets it? It's not the religious scholars. It's not the disciples. They've mostly fled. It's a Roman soldier.
Another centurion.
Standing guard over the execution. Surely he was the Son of God.
The executioner realizes who he just executed.
And here is the divine perspective the essay wants us to see. Rome meant to execute a criminal. They thought they were solving a problem. They thought they were snuffing out a light.
Yeah.
But God used their instruments, their cross, their nails, their soldiers, to accomplish the salvation of the world.
They were trying to delete the file, and they ended up uploading it to the cloud.
That's a very modern way to put it, but yes.
Yeah.
They facilitated the very thing they were trying to stop.
So Jesus rises, ascends, and we move into the book of Acts. And Rome is still there. In fact, in Acts, the map gets even bigger.
It does. We move out of Judea and into the wider empire.
Yeah.
And the central figure for our deep dive here is Paul.
Paul is fascinating because he is a dual citizen. He's Jewish, but he has Roman citizenship.
Which was a rare and powerful tool. Not everyone in the empire was a citizen. Most were just subjects. Citizenship was a real privilege. The essay discusses how Paul used his rights. He didn't just ignore his legal status, he leveraged it.
Can you give an example of that? How did that actually work? Was it like a get-out-of-jail-free card?
Not free, but certainly a get-out-of-unfair punishment card. Several times, when he was about to be flogged or mistreated by a mob or local magistrates, he played the citizen card.
Oh, wow.
In Acts 22, he's tied up, about to be whipped, and he asks, "Is it lawful for you to scourge a man who is a Roman and uncondemned?"
And that stopped them cold.
Instantly. Because violating the rights of a Roman citizen was a grave offense. The magistrate could lose his job or his head for that.
So Paul wasn't afraid to use the legal protections of the pagan empire to protect his ministry.
Exactly. He wasn't anti-government in that sense. He used the tools available.
Right.
But the ultimate use of this citizenship was his appeal.
I appeal to Caesar.
Right. This is the legal mechanism called provocatio. If a citizen felt they weren't getting a fair trial in the provinces, they could appeal directly to the emperor.
It's like taking it to the Supreme Court.
Yes. When he was stuck in the legal system in Judea, going absolutely nowhere, he exercised this right. And this is crucial. This appeal is what led him to the heart of the empire. It got him a ticket to Rome.
God used Roman law to get his apostle to the capital city.
Exactly. He traveled on a Roman ship under Roman guard, paid for by the Roman state to preach the gospel in the Roman capital.
And even when he gets there, he is under house arrest. But the essay makes a really powerful observation. Paul was bound, but the gospel was not.
I love that image.
Even while chained to a guard, he was reaching members of Caesar's own household.
Think about the logistics of that. He's chained to a Praetorian guard. Shifts change every few hours. That means every few hours, Paul has a new captive audience.
Talk about infiltrating the enemy camp.
He was turning his prison into a pulpit. And eventually, we know from the book of Philippians that there were saints in Caesar's household. He was converting the staff of the emperor.
But it wasn't all protection and appeals. Section 3 of the essay also deals with the paradox of persecution, because things got ugly.
They did, especially under Nero. The essay mentions the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD.
And Nero needed a scapegoat.
Rome burned, and people were blaming Nero. So he pointed the finger at this weird new sect, the Christians. This is where we see the intense escalation of persecution, cruel executions. We're talking about Christians being used as human torches to light Nero's gardens. It was horrific.
This is where we see the martyrdom of Peter and Paul, right?
Yes, it looked like Rome was going to wipe this new movement off the map completely. It looked like the end. But the result was the exact opposite. Despite Nero's efforts, the essay says the gospel spread along Roman roads faster than armies could march. The attempt to bind the message only set it free.
It's like trying to put out a fire by stomping on it, but you just spread the sparks.
Exactly. And those sparks landed everywhere.
Okay, so that's the history. We've seen the narrative from birth to Acts. Now, I want to pivot to the next major section, theological significance. Brother Brome's essay wants us to put on our theological glasses now.
This is where we connect the dots. We move from what happened to what does it mean in God's grand design.
And he starts with the dispensational perspective, specifically looking at Daniel.
Daniel's dream, or rather, Nebuchadnezzar's dream that Daniel interpreted, the great statue.
Gold, silver, bronze, and then iron.
The fourth kingdom, iron. The essay identifies this as Rome.
Why iron? Why not gold?
Iron isn't pretty. It doesn't shine like gold. But it is strong. It crushes. It breaks. The essay describes it as a kingdom that crushes everything in its path, that fits the Roman legions perfectly. They were an iron machine.
But the statue doesn't last.
No.
Okay.
And this is the key. A stone cut without hands strikes the statue. Not the head, but the feet. And the whole thing comes crashing down.
And that stone represents...
That stone symbolizes Christ's eternal reign. It replaces these temporary human empires. The theological point here is that Rome, for all its iron strength, was temporary. It was destined to fall to make way for the kingdom of God. It was just a placeholder.
That's a very powerful image. The second theological point he brings up is from Galatians 4:4, the fullness of time.
But when the set time had fully come, God sent his son. The essay asks, why then? Why not 500 years earlier? Why not 500 years later?
Why Rome? I want to push back on this a little bit, actually. We often hear God chose the right time, but couldn't God have done this in the Persian Empire or the Greek Empire? What makes Rome specifically the perfect delivery system?
That's the key question.
Yeah.
The essay argues it comes down to three specific technologies, if you want to call them that, which Rome perfected.
Okay, walk us through them.
Number one is the roads. And I don't mean dirt paths. We're talking about 50,000 miles of paved, engineered highways.
We still drive on some of them today in Europe.
We do. Before Rome, if you wanted to go from Jerusalem to Rome, you were taking your life in your hands. Bandits, pirates, no maps. Rome cleared the sea of pirates and paved the land. They made travel boring.
And boring is good for missionaries.
Boring is essential. Paul could walk from city to city with a level of safety that just didn't exist 200 years earlier.
Okay, so we have the hardware, the roads.
And then you have the software, language. Because of Alexander the Great, and then Rome adopting Greek culture, you had Koine Greek.
The business English of the ancient world.
Exactly. Paul didn't have to learn a new language every time he crossed a border. He could preach in the synagogue in Damascus, the market in Athens, and the court in Rome, all in the exact same tongue.
So you have the roads to get there and the language to speak when you arrive.
And the third piece, the Pax Romana, the enforced peace. There were no borders to cross, no visas, no active wars between these regions. It was a free trade zone for ideas.
It's like, well, to use a modern analogy, it's like using the internet. It can be full of bad stuff, but it's also the most efficient way to get a message out. Rome was the internet of the first century.
That's a very good analogy. The hardware was Roman, but the software was the gospel.
Yeah.
God used Rome not because it was righteous, we firmly establish it was corrupt, but because he is sovereign. He used their infrastructure to export his gospel.
I really like that. The third theological point is about the distinction between Israel and the church.
This is a nuanced point in the essay. It distinguishes their respective roles.
How so?
Israel, during this time, was under bondage. They were awaiting a political and messianic deliverance. They wanted the Romans gone. They wanted a revolution.
Right.
The church, however, was born at Pentecost. It wasn't a political nation. It was a spiritual body. It spread across nations. It wasn't limited by geography or politics.
So the church didn't need to overthrow Rome to succeed.
Precisely. The church could grow within Rome, regardless of who was emperor. The empire couldn't erase Israel's promises. Those are still valid, the essay argues, but neither could it restrain the church's growth. Each had its place in the plan.
That brings us to section 5, spiritual lessons and application. Because as we said at the beginning, we aren't just here for a history lesson. We want to know what this means for us.
And Brother Brougham offers 4 very practical takeaways for everyday life.
Let's go through them. The first one is God works through hostile powers.
This is a deep message of comfort. Think about the early Christians. The government wasn't just annoying, it was actively hostile. It was killing them. And yet the essay reflects on the fact that the very empire that crucified Jesus and persecuted the saints was used to spread the news of salvation.
It's the ultimate jujitsu move by God.
It is. The encouragement for the listener is this: no opposition can halt God's plan. In fact, he often uses the opposition to advance it. So when you see forces in the world that seem hostile to faith, don't panic. God is likely using them in ways you can't see yet.
That is so important to remember. We get so anxious about the culture war or political shifts, but God is bigger than that.
Much bigger.
The second lesson is the fleeting nature of earthly power.
I love the visual contrast the essay paints here. Imagine Rome at its absolute height. Marble, gold, ironclad legions. It seemed invincible. It seemed eternal. They literally called it the Eternal City.
And today?
Today, the Colosseum is a ruin. Tourists walk through it and take selfies. The Forum is a pile of broken stones. The Caesars are just names in history books. But Christ's kingdom,
It's still growing.
it's bigger than ever, built on faith and love, not iron and swords. It reminds us not to be impressed by things that look powerful today. They are temporary.
Well, lesson number 3 is dual citizenship.
This comes back to Paul. We have earthly duties. We pay taxes, we follow laws, just like Paul did.
We render to Caesar.
We do. We aren't anarchists, we are good citizens. But our ultimate allegiance is to the King of Kings. As Jesus told Pilate, "My kingdom is not of this world."
So we live here, but we belong there.
Exactly. It's a balance.
Yeah.
We never confuse the flag with the cross. Our loyalty to God always comes first.
And the final lesson, boldness.
This is the challenge. If Paul could preach in Caesar's household, literally under the nose of the man who wanted to kill him, then what is our excuse?
Oof, that hits home.
We can trust God to open doors in our generation, regardless of cultural opposition. The essay puts it this way: the same Lord who guided his church through the might of Rome still rules over the nations today.
That is a word we really need to hear. It's easy to feel intimidated, but we have the same spirit that Paul had.
We do.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's summarize what we've seen. Rome was a stage.
It rose, it shone, and it fell. It was a tool.
And the kingdom of Christ endures.
It does. Rome was the backdrop, but God was the director.
The essay closes with a scripture that I think perfectly encapsulates this boldness we just talked about. It's from Romans, fittingly, chapter 1, verse 16. I'll read it here. "For I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes, first to the Jew, then to the Gentile."
The power of God, not the power of Rome, not the power of armies, the power of God. That verse was written to believers living in the capital of the world, telling them that the real power wasn't in the emperor's palace, but in the message of Jesus.
That is where our confidence lies.
Amen.
And before we go, we want to leave you with a simple blessing based on what we've learned today.
May you walk today with the confidence of that gospel, knowing that no matter the power of the world around you, you belong to a kingdom that cannot be shaken. Grace and peace be with you.
We'll see you on the next deep dive.